Hi, and welcome to Across the Desk. This week, we're going to continue our series on state legislative bills for the 2021 legislative session. And here we have a guy that's no stranger to the political process, and he's always out there. This is Senator Standridge, who, from the Norman area, has put together a bunch of bills this session, and I'll probably talk about more than one of his as we go along here, but I'm going to highlight one right now, and this is Senate Bill 383. Senate Bill 383, what it does is an act relating to the censorship of social media. So here we go, Mr. Standridge. I don't know if you remember, but here about a month or so ago, he was kind of miffed about the fact that there's a bunch of liberal type people out there in Oklahoma, like myself, who are out on social media platforms like YouTube, like this show is on, who are out there espousing their views like I am and talking about things in Oklahoma politics like me. There's others. I'm not the only one. Nick Singer has a little blog. We have the Oklahoma Democratic Party chair coming out with her statements a few times a week, and we have the talented Scott Hamilton with his show on the Oklahoma Democratic Party channel themselves, and they have a YouTube channel as well. So we have a bunch more faces out there and a bunch more people spouting out a bunch of stuff, like our own people here, Sean Cummings, who also has been on this show. He's very vocal too, and there's others. We have Red State Radio, which is from Mark Folk, another very popular guy that's here in the Oklahoma area. So Standridge is kind of concerned about these people and what their views are, and that they've been getting out there protesting and everything else. So he puts out a deal, and it was kind of a funny thing where he puts out, he's looking for his online militia. I don't know if you remember this, but he was out there talking about how he wants to put on an online militia to combat these commie thugs online on their social media platforms and counter their arguments. And that's what he wants to do, because he thinks we're just being too forceful and it's scaring him way too much. So he's created a little war on social media and liberals. And one, he wants to create his army to get out there and combat us, while also go through the legislative process and cause a little war there too with this little Senate bill that wants to sanction social media companies for perceived censorships. Now, there's something really interesting about this bill. It's not very long. It's only a couple of pages. But there's a few things in it that I really want to point out that really tells you a lot about how Standridge thinks. First up, I want to point out is he's got a little idea, he's got a little item here. And he talks about, the first parts talk about definitions. He wants to define the terms. Well, in this one, he defines two terms, and I want you to really pay close attention to how he defines these terms. First, he defines hate speech. In his item number 2 here, hate speech means a phrase concerning content that an individual arbitrarily finds offensive based on his or her personal moral code. So this is how he's defining hate speech. In this bill, he wants to enact into law. So this defines hate speech. Hate speech is a personal, individual, arbitrarily offensive view. So you got to look this up. So one, I was like, okay, arbitrarily finds offensive. So I had to look that up. So I looked up the word arbitrarily. And what it meant was by no authority standard, by only a person's authoritative feeling. So he feels this is autocratically done by a person to list something as hate speech. So hate speech isn't any kind of norm. It's somebody's personal view, as and as it states with the arbitrarily word, a very personal, rigid view of what is offensive when it comes to hate speech. That's how he wants to define hate speech, because he defines it as an individual arbitrarily, what he finds arbitrarily finds offensive. Arbitrarily finds offensive, that's what I personally find offensive. I haven't gone through any other censors or any other media. It's what I authoritatively, autocratically decide is offensive. That's hate speech. That's how he wants to define it. So it's their own personal moral code, nothing else. So I find that interesting. Because here you go, in definition number 3, he talks about what is obscene. So he wants to define what obscenity is. Obscene means that to the average person, applying contemporary community standards, not an individual case, not an individual's arbitrary offensive, but this is it's a set of standards. I don't know where you get these standards, but this is just societal norms is what he wants to say. Hey, these are just, here we go with what an average person would be applying contemporary community standards. Contemporary community standards as applied by the average person is what obscene is. Now, you can't do that with hate speech. You can't do that. There's no, hey, the body politic here deems that this should be hate speech. Nope. That's not what hate speech is. Hate speech is an individual's personal moral code, not relying upon anything else. While what's obscene, well, we have a definition for that. And we can say that, hey, this is what the average person. Now, what's the average person? Who is the average person? What does Standridge deem the average person is? Is it some militia member that's going off with his guns, telling he's going to shoot everybody? Is that the average person that Standridge thinks is average? In some respects, I really believe it is. I believe it is who he thinks is average. So, considering who he thinks the average person is, I kind of take exception to his definition of obscene. I even take exception to his definition of what hate speech is. He wants to define hate speech in a totally opposite light of what he wants to define what obscene is. And this is the level of conservative cowardice that we see in everyday life. It's because Standridge, when it comes down to it, he's really a coward. When you look at stuff like this, here he's like to dish it, but he's just way too cowardly to take it. So he's trying to manipulate with things. He's trying to fight an online perceived media threat from the liberal left by putting together his militia. And then on the other respect, he's going to go to the legislative channel, squash social media, and in the process start defining things on what hate speech is and what should be deemed obscene. So here we go. That's the first level of conservative cowardice in this bill that I want to point out. And the things that I thought was really odd that I think, hey, we really ought to look at this. And not just because, this is what he wants to pass into law, because I really take, this really tells you a lot about how he thinks. It tells you a lot about how he thinks. He thinks hate speech is just, it's nonsensical. It doesn't matter. It's just someone's personal, rigid view about anything. And it gets worse. And I really want to take you through this a little more. Hold on. Look, I'm going to scroll down here. So when he defines different things like what political speech is. What political speech is relating to the state or the government, the body politic, public administration of government. Political speech includes speech by government or candidates of office and any discussion of social issues. So this is important to know. He wants to put in what political speech is, and he wants to define political speech as speech from elected officials. Because if you haven't noticed, it's the elected officials that are getting banned from Twitter and Facebook and YouTube here lately because of their hate speech. Their perceived personal bias that this is hate speech, because hate speech really doesn't exist in Mr. Standridge's view. It doesn't. He doesn't believe in hate speech. As a matter of fact, it's not that he doesn't believe in hate speech. He believes hate speech shouldn't be illegal. That's what it is. It's not that I don't think he believes in hate speech. It's that he believes you ought to be of the right to be hateful. He really does. He thinks that if you say, hey, black people have less genetic ability than everybody else, well, he's fine with that. He's absolutely fine with that because, one, it's not offensive. What's offensive is from what everybody describes. Well, maybe it could be, but, we need to get everybody together, and maybe it's not. But it's not hate speech, because hate speech is what an individual would deem that to be. And so it couldn't be hate speech to say something like that, and something like that may not be offensive. And if saying something like that isn't offensive, then it should be legal, and it shouldn't be taken down. And if social media does take it down, well, they should be fined. And what should they be fined? Well, it says right here, if you go down, and he talks about this. He talks about what these damages are. $75,000 per incident, per each deleted post, picture, or meme or whatever, $75,000 a shot. So if you post that you personally believe black people are genetically inferior, and they take that down, well, Standridge thinks you should be able to sue him for $75,000 because that's not hate speech. That's not even offensive in his mind. So therefore, you should be sued. And how are we going to do that? Well, in the provision, he talks about having the Attorney General be able to file civil claims on them from Oklahomans who've been disparaged in their freedom of speech because a private company with their own private servers decided not to let somebody use said private servers to promote what they deemed was hate speech. Though Standridge wants to define that out into law. And that's what we have here. And that's what you're seeing on this Standridge bill, this Senate bill that he's got going on, that he wants to shove through the Senate in Oklahoma so that we can punish social media companies who take down people's speech because it's deemed hateful or not beneficial in some way. And he wants to define that, hey, you know what? Elected officials should be able to post whatever they want. That's anything too. Oh, and let's go on further. He's got another section here that also talks about religious speech and what religious speech is and how it shouldn't be taken down as well. And groups or anything else. It shouldn't be done. Shouldn't do it. So that's what we got too here, but it's not quite as bad as a few of the things I wanted to point out in this whole mess. One, he's defining out what hate speech is and isn't, which tells you a lot about how Standridge thinks. And he also again wants to define what offensive means. Hey man, what's offensive? You know, well, this was what a normal person would decide was not deemed normal. Really? Well, could that be hate speech? Yeah, I guess maybe it could. I personally think maybe it could. Maybe Standridge thinks, hey, it could too, but I don't know. I personally believe he thinks that saying outrageous things against someone's race, against other religions, is perfectly fine, as long as it doesn't go against certain things that he deems should be punishable, like calling for violence. Now saying, hey, you know what? We hate Islamic Muslims and we should hang all of them and kill them all. Well, he thinks you should go after that. That shouldn't be allowed. Now that's probably, you know, that calling on violence, yeah, okay. Don't do that. That's probably deemably okay. He goes as far as put out a few items that is typically okay for social media to take down, which is reasonable. But this is in effect what it does with, and that's okay. This is kind of, you know, as you look at the fluff here, yeah, you're going to, you know, I agree with this. You know, I agree, hey, okay, he agrees certain things should be taken down by social media, but it's not what he agrees with that should be taken down by social media. It's what he doesn't agree with. It's what and how he defines certain words in here, and that he wants to go so far as allow our Attorney General to sue people outside the state for people on behalf of the state who had their posts taken down by a private company because they didn't want it on their private servers and have their private company associated with that. Not only that, he goes so far as to define certain things in here that I want to point out. He defines what a social media company is. They have so many subscribers to their social media site. For one thing, they aren't now a social media company isn't affiliated with a political party or religious group. That's another thing was to point out. So you know what, there are message boards and there are social media sites that are dedicated to religious, and there are social media sites dedicated to certain political ideologies. So those, he's exempting. Those people, man, they can take down whatever they want. They can do whatever they want, and they can discriminate all day long, whatever they want, and they can censor anything they want. It's the other social media companies that are perceived liberal that can't. See what I'm saying? See, so this is the unlevel playing field that he wants to create because Standridge is a coward, and he doesn't like playing on level playing fields. And he's trying to get any advantage he can because this is a social media war he's having. You got to understand, this is a media war against the left that he's fighting. That's what this whole bill is about. It's not about anything else other than that. Mostly how to punish social media companies, how to get his name in the spotlight so that he can look like he's fighting a champion against these evil big tech companies that want to squash the small Oklahoman who they could care less about. This is more about raising Mr. Standridge's profile than anything else, I think, personally. But this is a dangerous bill. It sets a dangerous precedent in a lot of ways. We're going to define out what hate speech is or isn't. And he wants to define also what is or isn't offensive. If he wants to deem what's normal person would describe as offensive, well, then that would be offensive. That's just blatantly cowardly, in my personal opinion. And so that's what we have with Mr. Standridge's first bill I'm highlighting here, and what it does and everything else. So Senate Bill 383 by Senator Standridge on the act relating to censorship of social media, and how he wants to make sure that social media doesn't censor you, but while you can censor social media if you're a conservative and a coward who just can't take what you like to dish. It's my show this week. Join us again next week for another great episode here in Season 3 of Across the Desk with Kit Fairchild. We'll see you next week.